It is crucial to remember that it is difficult to put an accurate figure on how relatively wealthy an individual was because wealth was based on gold, land, salt, and power, yet assessments differ among researchers. But we made our best estimate based on multiple sources and the work of multiple historians. These are the richest people who ever lived on Earth in today's dollars, adjusting for inflation. You're in for a surprise if your guess is anywhere below $100 trillion. According to numerous sources including Celebrity Net Worth, John D. Rockefeller built up a fortune that would be worth around $340 billion in today's money. Most productive man of USA Rockefeller began investing in the petroleum industry in 1863 and by 1880 his Standard Oil Company controlled 90% of American oil production. According to his New York Times obituary, Rockefeller was valued at about $1.5 billion, based on a 1918 federal income tax return, and estimates of his overall fortune, the equivalent of almost 2% of U.S. economic output, that year according to data compiled by Measuring Worth. The same economic share in 2014 would be equivalent to $341 billion. One of John's biggest expenditures was to build all the family mansions which today are nothing short of cultural landmarks. While the New Yorker faced controversy for monopolizing of the industry, Rockefeller also played a big part in giving back to the community, donating about $500 million to educational, religious and scientific causes through the Rockefeller Foundation. Rockefeller gets all the press, but Andrew Carnegie may be the richest American of all time. Money.com states that this Scottish-born industrialist stacked up the equivalent of around $372 billion by leading the expansion of the American steel industry in the 19th and early 20th century. He eventually sold his Carnegie Steel Company in 1901 to J.P. Morgan for $480 million, that equates to about slightly over 2.1% of U.S. GDP at the time, in the currency of the day. Carnegie also donated 90% of his earnings to philanthropic causes by the time of his death in 1919. Carnegie Corporation of New York, he established in 1911, his fortune has since paved the way from the discovery of insulin and the dismantling of nuclear weapons, to the creation of Pell Grants and Sesame Street. Ruling at a time that's been heralded as the Golden Age of Russia, Catherine the Great was a powerful monarch who transformed the nation into a global superpower during the 18th century, according to Sky History. She still holds the title today, as the longest reigning woman in Russian history. The Russian monarch inherited and controlled a vast network of land, wealth and political power, after assuming the throne in 1762, helming about 5% of the global GDP at the time thanks to her wealth of land, or the equivalent of $1.5 trillion today, according to Money.com. Appointing himself the first emperor of the world's biggest country, the founder of the Roman Empire, needs no introduction as one of the greatest and most famous rulers in history. Augustus Caesar's empire produced around 25 to 30% of the world's global output, and around a fifth of that was his own personal wealth, according to Stanford history professor Ian Morris. That means he would have been worth around $4.6 trillion today. For a while, Morris adds, Augustus personally owned all of Egypt. Along with owning an entire country, Augustus was estimated to have at least 10 million gold coins left by his uncle Julius. Only those 10 million gold coins are estimated to be equal to $200 billion in today's money. That's hard to top. However, probably his most important possession was his personal army. Of 250,000 soldiers, they were instrumental in his plans to keep the country under his rule. Joseph Stalin was a Soviet politician and political theorist, who led the Soviet Union from 1924 until his death in 1953. Stalin is a rare figure in modern economic history who also controlled one of the largest economies in the world. Although Stalin's wealth was almost indistinguishable from that of the Soviet Union, his unique combination of economic power and total control of the Soviet Union led several economists to call him one of the richest men of all time. OECD data show that in 1950, 3 years before Stalin's death, the Soviet Union contributed about 9.5% of world economic output. That level of production would equate to almost $7.5 trillion in today's time. Although this money did not directly belong to Stalin, he had the ability to exploit the economic power of the Soviet Union for any cause he chose. He had enormous power, and with his power he could get anything, says George O. Liebert, professor of history at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He controlled 1/6 of the planet's land mass, without checks and balances. However, it is hard not to put Stalin on the list of the most economically powerful people in history. His wealth may be uncertain, but there is no doubt that the personal financial influence of a prime minister is unmatched in recent history. The first and only female emperor of China, Empress Wu, of the Tang dynasty, was intelligent, politically savvy, and famous for being ruthless when it came to bumping off her opponents. She ruled the country when the economy of China accounted for around 23% of global GDP, which would be around $16 trillion today. Despite her sometimes controversial methods of wielding power, she nevertheless built up the country's wealth by trading tea and silk on the Silk Road, and oversaw the expansion of Imperial China into Central Asia. Some call her the richest woman ever. Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, popularly known as Akbar the Great, was the third emperor to rule the Mughal Empire. Money.com claims that he ruled over an empire valued at 25% of the global GDP. Comparable to the wealth of Elizabethan England at the time, the extravagance of Akbar's lifestyle nevertheless easily surpassed that of the European society, according to economic historian Angus Maddison. That assertion that India's elite class was wealthier than their counterparts to the West is backed up by data from economist Branko Milanovic, whose research shows the Mughal dynasty was one of the most effective empires of all time at extracting wealth from the population. Akbar built himself 3 astounding palaces in Delhi, Agra, and Fatehpur and decorated them lavishly. Akbar was a great patron of the arts and spent millions on paintings, books, music, and all sorts of artwork. He even tried to create his own religion by mixing Hinduism and Islam. This was actually a political maneuver trying to solidify a nation that was violently divided by religion. The sixth emperor of China's Song dynasty ruled over an immensely economically powerful empire, worth 25 to 30% of the world's GDP, between 1067 and 1085 AD, that would have been worth about $30 trillion in today's money, according to Professor Ronald A. Edwards. Historians claim that the kingdom was light years ahead of European governments when it came to effective tax collection, and its technological innovations and centralized form of governance also added to their wealth. The Emperor Shenzong brought high prosperity along with his new social policies, as much-needed relief to the poorest farmers while the country enjoyed peace and economic growth. It is believed that Genghis Khan was so powerful, and his Mongol Empire so wide-reaching, that his DNA can be found in as many as 16 million men today, according to a 2003 scientific report. Having created the largest empire of all time, which covered most of China and Central Asia during his lifetime, and stretched as far as Poland and Vietnam afterward, the richest estimates that he would have been worth about $120 trillion in today's money. However, despite his great power, scholars say Genghis never hoarded his wealth. On the contrary, The Khan's generosity was key to his influence. One of the bases of his success is sharing the spoils with his soldiers and other commanders, says Morris Rossaby, a professor of history. Jack Weatherford, author of Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, explains that Mongol soldiers, unlike many pre-modern armies, were banned from taking personal loot. After an area was conquered, every item taken was inventoried by official clerks and then later distributed amongst the military and their families. Genghis still received a share of the spoils, but that hardly made him rich. He built no palace for himself or family, no temple, no tomb, and not even a house, says Weatherford. He was born in a wool gur and he died in a wool jar. At death he was wrapped in felt, like any common person, and then buried. His estimated net worth. Incomprehensible, he was richer than anyone could describe. Coming in strong at number 1 is a name that you may not even recognize. Mansa Musa was the ruler of the Mali Empire, which was immensely rich in land, salt and gold. Once in power, Musa conquered the city of Timbuktu, which was the most important trade city in Africa, at the moment comparable to Constantinople. These conquests came with some lucrative perks, quickly making Musa the wealthiest man on earth. Historians estimate the Mali Empire was at one point the largest gold producer in the world, meaning its ruler was in possession of incomprehensible wealth. While celebrity net worth has estimated his wealth to have been the equivalent of around $400 billion, historians believe it's virtually impossible to come to a conclusion on the real number. The African ruler was famous for making the most extravagant pilgrimage to Mecca of all time, with the BBC reporting that the king left Mali with about 60,000 men, from royal officials to camel drivers and slaves. He spent and donated so much gold in Cairo during his 3-month stay there that he destabilized the local economy, affecting the price of gold in the region for the next 10 years. What lessons did the top 10 richest people in history teach you, and which one you admire the most? If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below. Also, be sure to check out our other videos. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.